So as Russia's invasion continues in Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces seem to have caught the Russian troops off guard. In the latest reports that have now come in, the Ukrainian troops claim that they are making some lightning gains in the northeastern part of the country to take back the territory that had in fact come under Russian occupation at the beginning of this war. Now, these are all claims at this point of time. It's difficult to in fact ascertain as to how much of this progress is being made on the ground, but this is what Ukraine claims to have gained control of more than 3,000 square kilometers of its territory since their counteroffensive began at the beginning of this month. Now, if you look at these visuals from the Chakalovsky in the Kharkiv region, the Ukrainian soldier can be seen raising the national flag on an antenna tower. And also recently, the Ukrainian forces have claimed to have seized at least about 30 settlements in the northeastern region of Kharkiv after pushing back the Russian troops. Now, the counteroffensive attempts of Ukraine to regain control of all lost territories do not end just here. Ukrainian forces say that they've managed to enter into the city of Izium in the eastern region. And Ukrainian officials also say that the Russian troops have left weapons and ammunition behind as they beat a pretty hasty retreat. Izium, remember, has been under Russian control for quite some time now. It had become a key strategic city for Russian military. Russia was using Izium as a launch pad for attacks into the Donetsk region. The setback for Moscow just keeps on coming in the last 10 days. The Ukrainian forces also claim to have entered the town of Kupiansk. Now, Kupiansk is a key rail hub for the supply of goods, and if the Ukrainian forces are able to gain control of the entire town, then this will, of course, now create a new problem for Vladimir Putin and his troops, as Kupiansk sits on the supply route towards other Russian positions in the eastern front line.
Продовжується деокупація України. Загалом, за останні дні від російської окупації звільнено близько 2000 квадратних кілометрів української території. Наші підрозділи зайшли до Куп'янська. Триває звільнення населених пунктів Куп'янського та Ізюмського районів Харківської області. За добу для підтримки дій наземних угруповань.
Now, the Ukrainian troops are not just trying to focus on Kupiansk. In a video footage that's been released by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian military can in fact be seen raising its national flag and singing its national anthem in Balaklia.
Перше велике місто під час нашого наступу. І я впевнений в тому, що це не останнє місце. У нас попереду Куп'янськ, який вже наполовину взятий нашими військами. Попереду Ізюм, ну і багато інших. Тому сьогодні офіційно ставимо крапку.
While on the other hand, the Russian military has made a surprise announcement on Saturday. In the announcement, it said that they are now regrouping their forces from Kharkiv to the Donetsk region to focus their military efforts there.
Для достижения заявленных целей специальной военной операции по освобождению Донбасса принято решение перегруппировать российские войска, находящиеся в районах Балаклеи и Изюма, для наращивания усилий на Донецком направлении. С этой целью в течение 3 суток проведена операция по свертыванию и организованной переброске изюмско-балаклейской группировки войск на территорию Донецкой Народной Республики. В ходе этой операции проведен ряд отвлекающих и демонстрационных мероприятий с обозначением реальных действий войск. В целях недопущения ущерба российским войскам по противнику наносилось мощное огневое поражение с применением авиации, ракетных войск и артиллерии.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what's in fact happening in these regions around Kharkiv, we're being joined by Dr. Lada Roslicki, who's joining us live from Kiev, and she'll be, of course, giving us the Ukrainian perspective on what is unfolding in the theatre of war in this particular area around Kharkiv. Now, Dr. Roslicki, this is a counter-offensive that Ukraine started off at the beginning of this month. In the last 10-odd days, Ukraine seems to have made some remarkable progress. Give us a sense of what it has taken Ukrainians to, in fact, push back the Russian forces from the regions around Kharkiv.
Well, basically, it has taken a lot of manpower and goodwill from particularly the human beings who have been captured in these territories which Russian forces were liberating. Mm-hmm. So there was a really tight cooperation between the locals with the Ukrainian army, which really facilitated the liberation of these territories. That combined with the extra support with the artillery and HIMARS systems is, of course, extremely important. Whatever is happening, however, with these counter offensives, we have to understand that every day Ukraine is being bombarded. In Kiev, we had already 3 air raid sirens today. They're daily ongoing things. So the terrorism is continuing. And one of the most tragic aspects of the liberated territories is the amount of rapes and mutilated and killed civilians. So when the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian forces are coming in, liberating the territories, we're being exposed to very, very much human rights violations.
Absolutely, indeed. Human rights violations is, of course, a key, crucial issue of this war. But Dr. Roslicki, I also want you to weigh in a bit about, the tactics that are being used. It was being said in the battle for Donbas that Russia was outgunning Ukraine. They could field 10 artillery guns for every 1 gun that Ukraine was able to field. But now with Western military support having come in for Ukraine, where the Americans have said that the HIMARS guns are making a big impact on the battlefield, is that what is now changing facts on the ground in favor of Ukraine?
Well, I think it's a combination of the manpower that has been supported. So we have had more manpower sent to the areas of concerted counterattacks. We have not only the United States, but an entire international community that is supporting Ukraine at this point. So Ramstein meetings, we have over 40 countries supporting Ukraine in understanding that this is really a country that is not only fighting for its own survival and fighting against its own genocide, but these are countries who have combined together in order to push back Russian complete irrational imperialism and violations of international law.
Absolutely, indeed. Dr. Roslicki, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Kiev and giving us the Ukrainian perspective in terms of what is happening on the battlefield there.
Thank you.
And also remember, at this point of time, it is difficult to in fact ascertain as to what exactly is happening on the battlefield independently. A lot of these are still claims and counterclaims. And to give us the Russian perspective of how the war is in fact going and how much of these reverses has Russia actually suffered, we are being joined by Dmitry Babich from the Russian capital, Moscow. Now, Dmitry is a political analyst at Sputnik, a Russian international news agency. Now, Dmitry, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on WION. Now, this of course, is the story that has dominated the headlines in terms of the last 10 days of the war. There are these spectacular successes which Ukraine claims. They claim that they've taken back as much as about 3,000 square kilometers of territory that Russia had occupied since the beginning of this war. What is Russia going to say for this?
Let's see the things in perspective. Since the beginning of the Russian so-called special operation in Ukraine, in fact, the war started not in February this year, it started in 2014, when the Ukrainian nationalists ousted the legally elected president Yanukovych and then started by military means to pressure the population in the east of the country, which is Russian speaking and which voted Mr. Yanukovych into power. So since February this year, Russia liberated 30,000 kilometers, 30,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. So, okay, we now lost 3,000. It means just about 1/10 or 1/15 of the territory that we gained. So it's not a dramatic turn of the tide. It's not the victory of Ukraine. It's just an attack which was successful. But the mood in Russia is that this is an existential problem for us, just like For India, the existential problem is the plight of Hindus in Pakistan. Russians in Ukraine are treated like Hindus in Pakistan. We used to have about 50% of the Russian population there. Now only 10% are not afraid to say that they are Russians. The same story as
right. Now,
Hindus
I get the
in
context
Pakistan.
that you're trying to give this, but I want you to focus, Mr. Babic,
problem.
on the war that is unfolding in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now, the reason why this is being talked about is, over the course of the last 6 months, the reports that had been coming in was that Russia was able to outgun and outrange Ukrainian artillery, because the Russians had an artillery advantage that was said to be almost 10-1. But now to be pushed back in this manner in the last 10 days shows that the Ukrainians seem to be slowly getting an upper hand on the Russian forces. Is that how Russia sees this?
No, that's not the way we see it. And of course, Russia is not hitting the Ukrainian forces with the full fist, with its full strength. Everyone knows that Russia has powerful weapons which can win this war in 2 days. We just don't want to use these weapons because we view Ukrainians as our brothers. You can't tell a Ukrainian from a Russian in 90% of the cases. Absolutely. They speak very good Russian. So the point is that we are not hitting Ukraine with a fist, we are touching it with our fingers. But of course, since we are not using such powerful means as carpet bombings or powerful missiles that we have, in terms of artillery, now that the Western countries have been sending multiple launch rocket systems in dozens, and huge countries such as Germany, such as the United States, such as France, of course, tactically there may be some points where the Ukrainian army is stronger. But in general, I mean, I talk about the war. During the war, what is very important is the mood of the population. Who is considered to be just, who is considered to be fair.
I think that's an important point that you raise, the mood of the people. Now, Mr. Babic, I need to interrupt you there. The mood of the people that you're talking about within Ukraine at this point of time, if you were to look even into the eastern parts of Ukraine, which to a certain extent was dominated by Russian-speaking people, the Russian invasion is said to be extremely unpopular. How are you going to convince these people, who you say are Russian-speaking people within Ukrainian territories, that this war is just?
Well, you are repeating what the global media says, what the so-called international community says. Our previous speaker said, international community supports us. No, the Western countries support you, the G7. G7 is not the whole world. There are also Russia, India, China, many other countries which do not support the Ukrainian government. As for me, I lived in Ukraine for 15 years. I lived in the East. I know the mood of the people there. When this new nationalist government violently came to power in 2014, immediately Ukraine changed. All of the Russian-speaking newspapers, all of the opposition newspapers were shut down. They established a totalitarian regime. So people in the East, they simply have no voice in the media which work in Ukraine right now. But when we come there, when the Russian army comes...
I need to interrupt you there because we're almost completely out of time. I want you to answer one quick question for me. No, Mr. Babic, the question that I want to ask you is, with these advances that the Ukrainians now seem to be making on the back of these American-supplied weapons, I want you to shed some light on what the Russian strategy will be from here onwards.
Of course, the strategy will be to protect the Russian-speaking people in Donbass, to push the Ukrainian forces away from Donetsk. Donetsk is a city of 2 million people, which has been bombarded every day since 2014, for 8 years. Most of the civilian losses were in Donetsk during this war. So the main point is to push the Ukrainian artillery, these multiple launch rocket systems, away from Donetsk. That goal is being achieved right now. Yes, we're maybe retreating in another region. We are talking about Kharkov. Kharkov is another region in the north, also Russian-speaking. But Kharkov is less pro-Russian than Donetsk. Our aim is to save the people who are friends of Russia and who have been suffering under this nationalist government.
All right. I think you've made your point, Mr. Babic, because we're completely out of time. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, because this, of course, is a crucial story that we've been tracking on WION. At this point of time, the Ukrainians seem to have got a bit of an advantage on certain points on the battlefield. But like you pointed out, that Russia would, of course, want to get back. And, of course, it'll be interesting to see as to how this war, of course, progresses. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Babbage, for joining us and speaking to us here on WION. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.